For centuries, the teachings of the Buddha and the wisdom of Zen masters have guided us toward this inner peace. Through stories that transcend time, we are shown the path to mindfulness, compassion, and understanding, tools that help quiet the mind and bring clarity to the soul. So take a deep breath, quiet your thoughts, and prepare to journey through the wisdom of the ages. Let these stories of peace and enlightenment wash over you, helping you find stillness in the midst of life's chaos. 1. The story to arrows. One day, the Buddha was sitting with his disciples in a peaceful forest. Clearing the trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the sound of birds filled the air. The Buddha often taught his disciples about the nature of suffering and the path to enlightenment, and on this particular day, a troubled disciple approached him with a question. Master, the disciple said, bowing before the Buddha, I do not understand why we suffer so much in this life. Pain seems to follow us wherever we go. Why is this so? And how can we find peace amidst so much suffering? The Buddha gazed at the disciple with kindness and understanding. He saw the confusion and frustration in his student's eyes and knew that this was a question many of his followers pondered. Let me explain, the Buddha said gently. Imagine that a person is struck by an arrow. This arrow causes pain, and the pain is inevitable. This is the first arrow. The disciples nodded, understanding that the first arrow symbolized the inevitable difficulties of life, the physical pain of illness, injury, or loss. But now, the Buddha continued, imagine that, after being struck by the first arrow, the person is then struck by a second arrow. This second arrow does not come from outside, it is created by the mind. It is the anger, fear, frustration, or sorrow that follows the pain. This is the second arrow. The Buddha paused, letting his words sink in. You see, he said, while the first arrow is unavoidable, the second arrow is optional. The first arrow represents the natural pain we all experience in life, the challenges and hardships we cannot escape. But the second arrow, the suffering caused by how we react to that pain, is something we can choose to avoid. The disciple listened intently as the Buddha explained that when we experience physical or emotional pain, the first arrow, we often make it worse by adding a second layer of suffering with our mental reactions. We become angry, resentful, or anxious, and these emotions deepen the wound. Instead of accepting the pain, we resist it, and in doing so, we increase our suffering. The Buddha looked around at all his disciples and continued, when we are struck by the first arrow, we must recognize it for what it is, a natural part of life. But we must also recognize the second arrow. It is the arrow we create ourselves. Through mindfulness and understanding, we can choose not to let the second arrow pierce us. The disciple, beginning to understand, asked, Master, how can we avoid the second arrow? How can we prevent our minds from adding to our suffering? The Buddha smiled. By practicing mindfulness, we can observe our thoughts and emotions without becoming attached to them. When we feel pain, we can acknowledge it without judgment. We can accept that pain is part of life, but we do not need to dwell on it or create more suffering through resistance or negative thoughts. In this way, we can stop the second arrow before it strikes. The disciple bowed again, grateful for the Buddha's wisdom. He realized that while pain in life was inevitable, suffering was often something he had been creating for himself. By choosing to respond to pain with awareness and acceptance, he could find peace even in difficult circumstances. The lesson: the story of the two arrows teaches us an important distinction between pain and suffering. The first arrow, representing unavoidable pain, is something that all of us experience in life, whether it be physical discomfort, emotional hurt, or loss. These challenges are part of the human experience. However, the second arrow, symbolizing the suffering caused by our mental and emotional reactions, is something we create ourselves. When we react to pain with fear, anger, or resentment, we deepen in our suffering. The Buddha teaching in this story encourages us to practice mindfulness and acceptance. While we cannot control the first arrow, we have the power to avoid the second one by responding to pain with awareness, understanding, and compassion. By doing so, we can reduce our suffering and find peace, even in the face of life's inevitable challenges. To the monk and the tiger, once upon a time, in a quiet mountain monastery, nestled deep in the forest, there lived a wise and peaceful monk. Every day, he would take long walks through the surrounding woods, meditating on the beauty of nature and the teachings of the Buddha. He found great peace in the solitude of the forest, where he could connect deeply with the present moment and the world around him. One day, during his walk along a narrow mountain path, the monk suddenly heard a loud, frightening sound. A tiger's roar echoed through the trees. He froze for a moment, his heart pounding, and when he turned, he saw a large, fierce tiger charging toward him. Through the thick forest underbrush, the tiger's eyes were locked on him, and its powerful body moved with terrifying speed. The monk's first instinct was to run, and he did. He sprinted down the path, his robes billowing behind him as the tiger drew closer and closer. Desperate to escape, he saw a vine hanging down the side of a cliff. Without hesitation, he grabbed the vine and began to climb down, hoping to find safety below. As he descended the cliff, clinging tightly to the vine, he looked down and his heart sank below him. Another tiger was pacing at the bottom of the cliff, waiting for him to fall. He was trapped. There was no way up and no way down. The monk paused, dangling from the vine, with one tiger above and another below. His situation seemed hopeless, but as he hung there, suspended between the two tigers, something caught his eye. Growing out of the cliffside, just within reach, was a small, wild strawberry plant. On the plant was a single ripe, red strawberry. In that moment, the monk stopped thinking about the tigers, his fear, and his predicable. Instead, he reached out with one hand, carefully plucked the strawberry, and put it into his mouth. He bit into the fruit, savoring its sweetness. The taste was exquisite. For that brief moment, all that existed was the joy of the strawberries. Flavor, sweet, fresh, and perfect. Despite the danger surrounding him, the monk found peace in that single, mindful moment. He had accepted that he couldn't change his circumstances, but he could still fully experience the present. The monk smiled, knowing that this fleeting taste of sweetness was a reminder of life's beauty, even in the most precarious of situations. The lesson. The story of the monk and the tiger teaches a profound lesson about mindfulness and being present in the moment. Life often places us in challenging and seemingly impossible situations, much like the monk being trapped between two tigers. But even in those moments, there is always something to be grateful for, some small piece of joy that we can savor. The monk's ability to focus on the strawberry, despite the danger surrounding him, shows us that we can find peace and contentment by fully immersing ourselves in the present moment. Instead of worrying about the past or the future, the tigers in our lives, we can choose to focus on the beauty and sweetness of life, right here, right now. This story encourages us to embrace mindfulness and to enjoy the simple pleasures that life offers, no matter what challenges we face. 3. The story of the empty boat. There once was a man who loved to row his boat on a peaceful river. He found great joy in drifting along the water, enjoying the calm and solitude of nature. One evening, just as the sun was setting and the world was bathed in golden light, he decided to take his boat out for a quiet journey. As he paddled softly, relishing the tranquility, he noticed another boat heading directly toward him. At first, he called out politely, "Be careful," but the boat didn't change course. Still, the boat continued on its collision course. Now, angry, he began shouting, "Move aside, you're going to crash into me." Finally, as the two boats collided, he was ready to let loose his frustration, but when he looked closely, he realized that the boat was empty. There was no one inside. It was simply drifting, carried by the current. In that moment, the man's anger dissolved instantly. He sat there, feeling foolish for yelling at an empty boat. The lesson, the story of the empty boat, reminds us that much of our suffering comes from our own interpretations and reactions to events. If we can see the empty boats in life for what they truly are, we can let go of unnecessary emotions and find peace in our hearts. The story teaches the power of releasing the ego and not taking things personally, allowing us to navigate the river of life with more calm and clarity. This story is a metaphor for how our egos can make us react negatively to situations that have no actual harm intended, showing us the importance of inner peace and non-attachment. For the parable of the mustard seed. Once long ago, there lived a young woman named Kisa Gautami. She was kind, compassionate, and devoted to her family, but her life took a tragic turn when her only child, a beloved son, fell ill and passed away. Overcome with grief, Tisa could not accept her son's death. She carried his lifeless body in her arms, wandering from house to house, desperately seeking someone who could bring him back to life. At each door, Kisa begged, "Please help me, my son is dead. Is there anyone who can cure him?" But everyone she approached turned her away, saying that there was nothing they could do. Her sorrow grew heavier with each step, and her heart ached more with every rejection. One day, Tia's path led her to a wise elder who took pity on her and said, "Go to the Buddha. Perhaps he can help you." With a flicker of hope in her heart, Kisagomi hurried to the Buddha, who was known for his compassion and wisdom. She found him sitting calmly under a bat tree, surrounded by his disciples. Falling to her knees, she placed her son's body before him and pleaded, "Master, please bring my child back to life. I cannot bear this pain." The Buddha looked at her with great compassion and understanding. He could see Kisa was deeply suffering, but he also knew that she needed to learn a profound truth about life and death. He thought for a moment and then spoke softly, "I can help you, Kisa, but first you must bring me something. Go into the village and bring me a mustard seed." Kisa's heart leaped with hope. "Yes, master, I will bring you a mustard seed," she said, her voice trembling with relief. But before she could leave, the Buddha added, "The mustard seed must come from a household that has never experienced death. If you can find such a household, bring the seed to me, and I will bring your child back to life." Pisa nodded eagerly and set off on her mission. She went to the first house in the village and knocked on the door. A kind woman answered, and Kisa explained her request. "Please Can you give me a mustard seed? But it must come from a home where no one has ever died. The woman looked at Kisa with sad eyes and said, I am sorry, but my husband passed away last year. Kisa thanked her and moved on to the next house again. She made her request, but this time the response was, I am sorry, but my mother passed away many years ago. House after house, Kisagomi knocked on doors, hoping to find one that had never known death, but at every house she heard stories of loved ones lost, a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a child. As the day wore on, Kisa began to realize that death was not unique to her. It was a universal experience, one that touched every family. Finally, as the sun began to set, Tia returned to the Buddha empty-handed, but with a new understanding. She knelt before him, her heart no longer filled with desperate hope, but with acceptance. Master, she said, I could not find a single house that has never known death. Every family has experienced the loss of someone dear to them. Now I understand that death is a part of life, and no one can escape it. The Buddha nodded gently and replied, Tisa, you have learned an important truth. Death is inevitable, and suffering comes to all who are attached to the things of this world. But by accepting the impermanence of life, you can find peace. Your grief was not unique, it is shared by all beings. This is the nature of existence. With these words, Kisagomi realized that her suffering, though intense, was not hers alone to bear. She had been blinded by her personal grief, but now she saw that all people experience loss. This new understanding allowed her to release her son's body and marry him with dignity, finally finding a sense of peace in the face of life's inevitable changes. The lesson, the parable of the mustard seed, teaches a profound lesson about the nature of life and death. Kagami's grief was so overwhelming that she could not accept her son's death, and she sought a way to reverse the inevitable. However, through her journey of seeking the mustard seed, she learned the universal truth that death is a part of life, and no one is exempt from it. The Buddha's wisdom in this story reminds us that attachment to life's impermanence leads to suffering. Only by accepting that all things, people, relationships, and experiences are temporary can we find peace in the face of loss, grief, and suffering. Our natural responses to death. But by understanding that death touches everyone, we can learn to let go and find solace in the shared experience of humanity. This story encourages us to accept the inevitability of life cycles and to approach both life and death with wisdom, compassion, and acceptance. In doing so, we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering and find peace in the impermanence of all things. 5. The Buddha and the Angry Man. Once upon a time, while the Buddha was teaching a group of disciples in a peaceful forest, a man approached him with anger burning in his eyes. The man had heard about the Buddha's wisdom and teachings, but he felt threatened by the Buddha's influence over others. Filled with jealousy and resentment, he decided to confront the Buddha and insult him in front of his followers. As the Buddha sat calmly under the shade of a bod tree, the man stormed up to him and began hurling insults. You are nothing but a fraud, the man shouted. Who do you think you are? You may pretend to be wise and enlightened, but you're just deceiving people. The Buddha remained completely calm and unbothered by the man's harsh words. His expression didn't change, and he didn't respond to the man's anger. Seeing the Buddha's lack of reaction only made the man angrier. He shouted even louder. How can you just sit there, acting like you're above everyone else? Do you think you're better than me? I refuse to respect someone like you. Despite the man's fury, the Buddha stayed silent, and serene, simply watching him with compassion. Finally, after several minutes of shouting, the man grew exhausted. He had expected to provoke a response, but the Buddha's peaceful demeanor confused him. After catching his breath, the man demanded, "Why won't you say anything? Why won't you defend yourself? Don't you care what I think of you?" The Buddha looked at him with kindness and finally spoke, his voice soft and calm. "Tell me," the Buddha asked gently, "if someone offers you a gift and you decline to accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The man, puzzled by the question, thought for a moment before responding. "It would still belong to the person who offered it. If I don't take it, the gift remains theirs." The Buddha nodded. "Exactly. And in the same way, if you offer me your anger and peace, I do not accept it." That his anger had not affected the Buddha at all. Instead, it remained his own burden to carry. The Buddha continued, "If I refuse to accept your insults and your anger, they fall back on you. You are the one who suffers from them, not me. I choose not to be troubled by your words. Instead, I choose peace." The man stood in silence, contemplating what the Buddha had said. He realized that his anger had consumed him, but it had no power over the Buddha, who remained unaffected by it. In that moment, the man understood that holding on to his anger only harmed himself, not the Buddha. Feeling ashamed, the man bowed his head. "Master, I see now that my anger has only caused me pain. How can I learn to be at peace as you are?" The Buddha smiled warmly, his compassion shining through. "Anger is like a hot coal. You pick it up with the intention of throwing it at someone, but in the process, you burn yourself. Let go of the coal. Let go of your anger. Instead, practice mindfulness, compassion, and understanding. Through these, you will find peace." The man, humbled by the Buddha's wisdom, thanked him and bowed deeply. From that day forward, he sought to practice the Buddhist teachings, letting go of his anger and learning to find peace within himself. The lesson, The Buddha and the Angry Man, is a powerful story that teaches us about the nature of anger and how we can choose to respond to it. The Buddha's wisdom shows us that when someone tries to hurt us with their words or actions, we have the power to decide whether or not to accept that negativity. The Buddha's metaphor of the gift reminds us that anger, insults, and hatred only affect us if we choose to accept them. If we refuse to engage with someone's anger and instead remain calm and peaceful, we protect our inner peace and allow the anger to return to the person who created it. This story encourages us to practice non-reactivity and to not let sense others' negativity disturb our own sense of well-being. Like the Buddha, we can choose to respond with compassion and understanding rather than letting anger take hold of us. By doing so, we free ourselves from the burden of carrying anger and resentment, and we cultivate inner peace. Ultimately, the story reminds us that anger is a choice, and by choosing peace over anger, we empower ourselves to live with greater serenity and compassion. 6. The Farmer and the Horse. Once upon a time, in a small, quiet village, there lived a humble farmer. He was known by his neighbors for his hard work and calm demeanor. His farm was modest, and he had only one horse to help with all of his daily tasks, from plowing the fields to carrying heavy loads. Though he didn't have much, the farmer was content with his life. One day his horse ran away. The farmer woke up to find that his stable was empty and the horse had vanished. His neighbors, hearing the news, rushed to his house to express their sympathy. "What terrible luck," they said. "How will you manage without your horse? This must be such a misfortune." The farmer, however, remained calm. He looked at his neighbors and simply replied, "Maybe the Neighbors were puzzled by his response. How could he be so indifferent to such bad luck? They shook their heads and returned to their homes, convinced that the farmer was in denial about his loss. A few days later, to everyone's surprise, the horse returned, but it didn't come back alone. It brought with it a group of wild horses from the mountains. Now the farmer had not just one horse, but several. The neighbors heard the news and rushed back to the farmer's house. This time they were full of excitement. "How wonderful!" they exclaimed. "Now you have so many horses. What incredible fortune!" The farmer again looked at his neighbors, smiled calmly, and said, "Maybe." Once again the neighbors were confused. Surely this was a stroke of good luck. But the farmer seemed just as indifferent as he was before. They wondered why he didn't seem more excited about his newfound wealth. A few days later, the farmer's son decided to try taming one of the wild horses. While riding the horse, he was thrown off violently and broke his leg. The injury was severe, and the son would be unable to help with the farm work for a long time. Hearing of the accident, the neighbors returned to the farmer's house once again. This time they were filled with sympathy. "What bad luck," they said. "Your son has broken his leg, and now he cannot help you. This is truly unfortunate." As before, the farmer responded with his usual calmness. "Maybe," he said. The neighbors were now thoroughly baffled by the farmer. Every time something significant happened, whether it seemed good or bad, he gave the same nonchalant response. They couldn't understand why he wouldn't react more strongly to the events in his life. A few weeks later, the country was thrown into turmoil. A war broke out, and soldiers came to the village to draft all the young men into the army. Many of the village's sons were taken away to fight in the war, but because the farmer's son had a broken leg, he was not drafted and stayed home with his father once again. The neighbors visited the farmer. "How fortunate you are," they said. "Because of your son's injury, he was spared from the war. What amazing luck!" And once again the farmer replied, "Maybe the lesson, the story of the farmer and the course, teaches a profound lesson about the nature of events in life and how we perceive them. What seems like misfortune may turn out to be a blessing, and what appears to be good luck may lead to unexpected difficulties." The farmer's calm and measured response maybe reflects his understanding that life is unpredictable and it is impossible to judge events as good or bad in the moment. The farmer's with wisdom lies in his ability to stay detached from the outcomes of life's events. He neither celebrates nor despairs, because he understands that circumstances are constantly changing. What may seem like a blessing today could bring challenges tomorrow, and what feels like a loss today may lead to unforeseen benefits in the future. This story encourages us to approach life with acceptance and non-attachment. Instead of getting caught up in labeling events as good or bad, we can maintain a balanced perspective, knowing that life's twists and turns are often beyond our control. By doing so, we can find peace and equanimity, regardless of the circumstances we face. In the end, the story reminds us that the future is uncertain and only time will reveal the full impact of any event. The farmer's attitude teaches us to embrace life's ups and downs with grace and patience, accepting whatever comes with an open heart and mind. 8. The monk in the teacup. In a quiet Zen monastery nestled in the mountains, a revered monk lived a life of deep contemplation and mindfulness. His students admired him for his wisdom, calm demeanor, and the way he embraced the present moment, never disturbed by the chaos around him. Every day, the monk would sit in meditation, drink tea, and share lessons with his students. One afternoon, during their usual tea ceremony, the monk held up a simple clay teacup and gazed at it for a long moment. The cup was beautiful in its simplicity, with a soft, earthy color and a perfectly rounded shape. The students, curious about their master's silent contemplation, waited eagerly to hear what he had to say. After a few moments, the monk smiled and said, "This teacup is already broken." The students looked at one another in confusion. They could see clearly that the teacup was whole, undamaged, and perfectly intact. One of the younger students couldn't contain his curiosity any longer and woke up. "Master, the teacup is not broken. It is perfectly fine. Why do you say it is already broken?" The monk, still smiling, placed the teacup gently on the table in front of him. "In my mind," he said softly, "this teacup is already broken. It may seem whole now, but one day, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps years from now, it will break. This is inevitable. When I understand that it is already broken, I can fully appreciate it as it is without clinging to it. I can enjoy drinking tea from it, knowing that its life is temporary." The students were silent, absorbing the weight of the monk's words. They realized that the master wasn't speaking only about the teacup, he was offering them a deeper lesson about life itself. The monk continued, "Everything in life is like this teacup. All things, no matter how beautiful or precious or impermanent, we cannot hold on to them forever. When we understand that we are free to enjoy life fully, without fear of losing what we have, we can appreciate each moment, each relationship, each experience, knowing that it too will pass, and when it is gone, we will not suffer because we have already accepted its impermanence." One of the older students nodded thoughtfully and said, "Master, does this mean we should not love or care for things because they will one day be gone?" The monk shook his head gently. "No, it means the opposite. When we accept the impermanence of all things, we can love them more deeply, because we are not holding on out of fear of loss. We love and appreciate them for what they are in this moment. We understand that they are part of the natural flow of life. In this way, we can live with a peaceful heart, unburdened by the attachment to things that are bound to change." The students, now enlightened by the monk's lesson, sat in silent meditation, contemplating the truth of his words. They realized that the teacup was a metaphor for their own lives, their relationships, and everything they held dear. By accepting that everything they cherished was already broken, they could live with greater freedom and inner peace. From that day forward, whenever the students sat down for tea, they would remember the monk's lesson. They would hold their teacups with a sense of mindfulness, appreciating each sip and each moment, knowing that life's beauty comes from its fleeting nature, and when things inevitably changed or were lost, they were prepared, their hearts open to the ebb and flow of existence. The lesson, the monk in the teacup, teaches a profound lesson about impermanence and non-attachment. The monk's declaration that the teacup is already broken reflects the inevitable truth that all things in life are temporary. By accepting this fact, we free ourselves from the pain of attachment and learn to live in the present moment. This story encourages us to appreciate life's moments, relationships, and possessions without clinging to them out of fear of loss. When we embrace the impermanence of all things, we can love more deeply and live with greater peace, knowing that change is a natural part of life. The story also shows us that non-attachment does not mean detachment from love or experience. Instead, it allows us to engage fully with life without being weighed down by the fear of loss. It teaches us to hold things like L, to enjoy them fully in the moment, and to let them go when the time comes. Ultimately, the monk in the teacup invites us to cultivate a peaceful heart by accepting the truth of impermanence and learning to cherish the present with grace and mindfulness. 9. The Buddha tames the elephant. Nagiri. During the time when the Buddha was residing in Rajagaha, a city in ancient India, his teachings were spreading widely, and more people were following his path of peace and enlightenment. Among those who were jealous of the Buddha's growing influence was Devadatta, his cousin and former disciple, who harbored resentment and desired power for himself. Devadatta sought to harm the Buddha in many ways. One of his most dangerous plots involved an elephant named Nagiri. Nagiri was known for his wild nature and great strength, and he was kept in the royal stables. Devadatta went to the elephant keepers and persuaded them to release Nagiri into the streets when the Buddha was passing by, hoping that the wild elephant would trample and kill him. The day came when the Buddha was walking through the city with his disciples, teaching and spreading his message of compassion. David's men released Nagiri, and the furious elephant charged through the streets, causing panic and terror. Among the people, the villagers ran in fear, and even the Buddha's disciples urged him to take shelter. But the Buddha remained calm and continued walking toward Nagiri with a serene and fearless demeanor. As Nagiri charged toward him, the Buddha stood still, emanating a powerful aura of loving kindness, metta, and compassion. He raised his hand in a gentle gesture of peace, focusing his mind on the deep compassion he felt for all beings, including the frightened and angry elephant. The Buddha's presence was filled with such calm and kindness that it had a profound effect on the raging animal. When Nagiri came close to the Buddha, he suddenly stopped. The fierce anger in the elephant's eyes faded, replaced by a sense of calm. He bowed his head before the Buddha, who then gently stroked Air's head, speaking softly to him with compassion. The wild elephant knelt at the Buddha's feet, completely tamed and peaceful. Witnessing this miraculous event, the people of Rajagaha were astonished. They marveled at the Buddha's ability to turn a violent elephant into a gentle creature through the power of love and compassion alone. Even Dead's followers were humbled by this act and began to question their loyalty to him. After the encounter, the Buddha explained to his disciples and the people that loving kindness is a powerful force that can transform even the most aggressive beings. He taught that when we cultivate compassion within ourselves, we can overcome anger and hatred, just as he did with Nagiri. The Buddha's teachings helped the people understand the importance of maintaining inner peace and compassion, even in the face of hostility. The lesson this story emphasizes the power of love and compassion in overcoming aggression and fear. The Buddha's ability to calm Nagiri shows that true strength lies in a peaceful heart, capable of transforming even the most difficult situations. It teaches us that when faced with anger or violence, responding with compassion can create harmony and understanding, bringing peace not only to others but also to ourselves. The story of the Buddha and Nagi inspires us to face challenges calmly and with a loving mind, helping us cultivate patience and understanding, which can relax and soothe the mind. 10. The parable of the raft. One day, the Buddha was teaching his disciples about the nature of his teachings, the Dharma, and the importance of using it wisely. He used a simple yet profound parable to illustrate how his teachings should be understood. The Buddha began by describing a man who found himself on the shore of a river. The river was deep, wide, and filled with dangerous currents, and the other side was peaceful and free of danger. This man wanted to cross the river to reach safety, but there was no bridge or boat in sight. So he decided to gather some logs, branches, and leaves and tied them together to construct a raft. Using his strength and effort, he paddled across the river on this makeshift raft, eventually reaching the safety of the opposite shore. Once on the other side, the man thought to himself, "This raft has served me well. It helped me cross the river and reach safety. Now should I carry this raft on my back and continue my journey, or should I leave it behind?" Mind recognizing that it has fulfilled its purpose, the Buddha paused and asked his disciples, "What do you think, monks, should the man carry the raft with him after he has crossed the river, or should he let it go?" The disciples replied, "He should leave the raft behind, venerable sir. It is no longer needed, as it has served its purpose." The Buddha smiled and continued in the same way, "Monks, I have taught you the Dharma, which is like a raft. It is useful for crossing over the river of suffering and ignorance. But once you have crossed over, you should let go of the Dharma, not cling to it or become attached to it. The teachings are meant to be tools for liberation, not objects of attachment." He further explained, "Just as the man does not carry the raft with him once he has crossed the river, you too should not cling to my teachings rigidly. Use them to reach enlightenment and freedom from suffering, and then be willing to let go of even those teachings. Holding on to them after they have served their purpose can become a burden. Just as carrying the raft would be lessened, the parable of the raft teaches us that the teachings of the Buddha or any spiritual guidance are like a raft that helps us cross from the turbulent waters of suffering to the peaceful shores of enlightenment. They are tools, not ends in themselves. Once we have achieved inner peace and understanding, we must let go of rigid attachment to those teachings. Remaining open and free, this story encourages us to practice flexibility, avoid dogmatism, and understand the true purpose of spiritual teachings. It reminds us that wisdom lies in knowing when to use something and when to let it go, helping us maintain a balanced and peaceful mind. Thank you for watching, and may you always carry the peace of these stories within your heart. Join our community by liking and subscribing to our channel Buddhist Insight, where ancient wisdom meets modern mindfulness. Discover more stories that soothe the mind, calm the heart, and bring light to your everyday life.